What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rays, and today we're going to be diving into the first rogue build of many to come to the channel. This is going to be the Ice-sassin. This will be a melee-focused class dealing high damage, fast attacks, quick cooldowns, and specialises in all things DPS. If you like big numbers and watching things too stunned to be able to act, or just all out flat on the floor, then this is going to be the build for you. We'll discuss all you need to know to be able to how to gear the class up, what to look out for enchantment-wise, and all the combos to maximise the damage potential for you. So what are we waiting for? Let's get right into it. Now, the Rogue is a very versatile class in Diablo 4, offering players a way to be able to play ranged, melee, and damage over time builds all in one nice, neat, and DPS package. With the Ice-sassin, I've chosen to spec into a couple of skills, but each holding a very specific role to the class, allowing the perfect synergy to be able to happen, whether it's from setting up buffs to energy management, or to even make yourself swift and nimble, ready for that pounce. So let's start with the skill tree, as this directly affects what skills we plan to use and what upgrades to help us out the most. First off, we need a basic skill, one that is always available should we get caught up with our own cooldowns, but also something to buff us up and hit our enemies with debuffs to get the DPS flowing. For this build though, I choose to go for Invigorating Strike, as this helps us with increased energy regen, allowing us to use our skills more freely, as any hit bumps our regen by 20%. Now keep in mind, this isn't a flat 20% increase, it will be related to your regen at the time, so currently for me I have an 8 per second regen, meaning I'll get that increased to 9.6. A small buff, but it is also a welcome one. Leaving this at 1 point is fine though, as it isn't a big damage dealer for us, so we don't want to increase those values any higher. What we can do instead is upgrade it with 2 points, giving extra abilities on use, in this case Enhanced and Fundamental. Enhanced really plays into this build, but it is also necessary for the follow-up point, allowing us to be able to get a 30% boost on hitting a crowd control enemy instead, and then allowing us to be able to get a new regen value of 10.4. Fundamental though gives us a great boost off the bat, allowing us to apply vulnerable to enemies when we use this skill below 50% energy. Now this status means enemies will now take 20% more damage from all sources, meaning follow-up strikes of Invigorating will start to hit harder, but also so will our other abilities that are going to be later on in the tree. That pretty much wraps up the start of the basic tree now, so it's time to move on to the next ability we use. Next up is where we get some tasty abilities that use our energy resource up, making them strong, but also making Invigorating as a resource generator all the more important. For this build we'll be looking at Twisted Blades as our primary damage dealer, a skill that does damage, applies a debuff, and then returns to you dealing more damage on the way back to the first hit target, and also any unfortunate souls to get caught in the crossfire. With 5 points in here, Twisting Blades will start to hit for 301 base damage, apply a debuff of 8% in the enemy hit for each cast, allowing you to be able to stack this up for further damage, and then return it on the way back for 482 base damage. This gets even more deadly with the upgrades when we purchased Enhanced, allowing us to be able to deal an extra 30% damage when the skill returns to sender, and Advanced giving us a 1 second cooldown reduction for each enemy hit on its return, up to a maximum of 3. This will apply on each cast, meaning multiples of this in a horde pretty much refreshes your whole arsenal most of the time, giving it some nice utility along the crazy damage boosts. It's also especially important that this skill has the imbuable tag, as we'll cross that fairly shortly. Overall, Twisting Blades is an insane ability, allowing you to do damage and then hit an army of enemies with great positioning for when the blades do return, hitting big figures as well as some nice cooldown for your skills to be able to do it all over again. I can't stress how good this of a skill that this is and how impactful this will be for the whole playstyle. With the agility tree, we aren't too fussed about much that is in here, so as much don't really help the class further out than what we can do already. That's not to discount the skills on offer here, as Caltrops is pretty good and the other melee abilities do have their uses, so if we aren't grabbing another skill, that frees us up to be able to put some points in for some general boost nodes, such is the case for the 3 points being dropped into Weapon Mastery. This node will offer some pretty nice boost to our character, depending on the gear that we have equipped. As the rogue can use Ice-sassin with both daggers and swords, we get some amazing boost to our overall damage, or just to some healthy enemies, which are targets that are above 80% HP. You can use both to great effect, but the sword damage buff being a constant and only 6% less is going to come into play a little bit more often, and I would recommend this one out of the two. But daggers are still by no means a bad choice, as there's just not much in it separating the two. Either way, it's an easy 3 point drop into this and a very welcome bump to our overall DPS. The subterfuge skills are some of my favourites in the game when it comes to support, allowing you to disengage from enemies, leaving them dazed and unable to do actions, or even to increase your damage through guaranteed crits or debuffs. First off, we have a rogue staple skill, which is going to be concealment. This allows the player to turn invisible to all enemies for 4 seconds, increase your movement speed by 25%, makes you unstoppable to any crowd control mechanic, and lastly allows you to be able to move through enemies. It's a perfect get out of jail free card should you get cornered or make a bad judgment call on a target. With upgrades though, this can offer so much more, as enhanced stealth allows you to be able to regain 40 energy for casting the skill, giving you the resource needed to be able to make a swift and stealthy strike. Pair this with the next upgrade though, which is countering stealth, and now you have a stored guaranteed critical strike to land on the first enemy you break concealment with. Using this skill with these upgrades not only gives you enough energy to be able to use a twisting blade, but it also gives you the critical strike to turn it into a murdering machine. As a side note to this strategy, twisted blades is the perfect skill to pair with the guaranteed crit, as not only does your initial strike become a guaranteed crit, but so does your return out of the enemy, and also any enemies in the route on that returning strike. With correct positioning, you can wipe out a whole horde with just 1 cast of concealment and 1 cast of twisting blades. Also in the subterfuge skills, we have the smoke grenade, another utility piece that while it doesn't offer by itself, it's perfect for pairing with the setup and having access to fast cooldowns. As standard, the grenade just applies daze to enemies in the radius, which is pretty good for crowd control, but also to be able to get free damage in with no fear of being hit back. The upgrades though will take this to the next level, as enhanced allows us to be able to debuff enemies hit for an additional 15% when we deal damage, and countering offers extra cooldown refunds when we directly hit enemies dazed by this effect, with 1 second as standard or 2 if the enemy is vulnerable, both of which can be covered by a first skill invigorating strike thanks to the upgrades that we grabbed. This also allows us some free use of throwing this around, meaning enemies don't stand a chance of surviving the coming onslaught. The penultimate skill tree for the beta is going to be the imbuement tree, allowing us to spec into 3 different elements when using certain skills. Each element works differently and all seem to have their uses, but for general play I feel like the ice is the best one to be able to gravitate towards. In this case I've only put the 1 point in for the skill, giving us the access needed to be able to use. I've yet to fully mess with maxing this out, so may look out for some more gear to be able to improve the chill applied per hit. Using this skill imbues any skill that can take the element for 2 casts, applying extra cold damage and 25% chill. Repeated uses will freeze the target, but just applying the chill in the first place gives us access to some nice damage multipliers, most notably from upgrading the skill. Grabbing enhanced allows us to be able to have a 30% chance on applying vulnerable on our next 2 casts for imbued skills, taking away the full dependency on our basic attacks to be able to apply it. And then next up we have mixed, allowing us to deal 20% more damage to crowd control targets, and even double this to 40% if the target is full frozen. I don't think I need to be able to explain this to why that's a winner right there. Lastly though, before we move on to ultimate skills, we do need to drop 3 more useful points into a node offering another nice damage bump. This will be for Frigid Finesse, with 3 points giving us 15% more damage to chilled targets, and this being doubled to 30% on a frozen target. This goes perfectly hand in hand with the previous upgrade nodes, and is one of the reasons that we get to see the damage that we do. Lastly, we have our ultimate nodes, giving us access to some of the strongest skills in the game. As we aren't playing ranged, nor are we going to be a trap god, I don't have Rain of Arrows or Death Trap in contention for being that slot. That being said, it's hard to ignore the damage potential that Shadow Clone can offer, as it copies all your actions just with a little less damage, clumping in and around about 60% of what you would usually do yourself. This little guy or gal can copy any skills you use, any attacks you throw out, any utility, and even more. With more skill points, we can increase the damage done by 20% to a total of 80%, but as this is a skill that has a 60-second cooldown, it's hard to justify when we have so few points in this beta, but this will 100% be revisited when the full game drops. But for now, this is going to be a great ultimate to use, but just not worth that extra 2 points to be able to get that 20%. So that's the skill tree all covered off, so how about the gear we need to be able to look out for? Of course, in Diablo a lot of gear drops are completely random, meaning it's so hard to pinpoint the perfect god rolls for each piece, but for how I currently have my rogue set up, I try to focus on multipliers like damage to crowd controlled enemies, cold damage, and any multipliers for all damage, life on kill, increases to crit chance and damage, and lastly damage to close enemies. Any combinations of these will see you well, offering big jumps in DPS, and the life on kill helps with sustaining fights, but will also help us with some energy resources when we combine them with certain enchantments. But speaking of enchantments, a lot of enchantments really play well into this type of crowd control and high DPS rogue, and while I don't have access to them all, I will cover some of my favourites so far. These include chill enemies hit by grenades have a chance to freeze enemies and deal more crit damage. Extra crowd control duration with increased damage to unstoppable enemies. When you evade, you leave stun grenades on the floor for tiny damage and stun for 0.5 seconds. Have an increased crit chance on injured enemies. Gain resource when you heal for so much life. And lastly, hitting enemies with a basic attack against charges to increase your damage on the next core skill cast. All of these work wonders, and while I am aware of a couple others I am on the hunt for, I will just put a pinned comment with any new additions to this, so we will have all of that info to hand. Before we talk strategies though, we need to talk about specializations. Now these extra class abilities get unlocked at a certain level, giving you a boost to certain playstyles. In the beta we only have access to 2 specializations, but for this build we'll be looking at combo points. Now how this specialization works is in tandem with your basic skill, where every single cast will give you a combo point up to 3, which you can see down here. These then affect your core skills, increasing their damage and offering other perks to go alongside them, but more specifically with our build, this will grant us a 20% movement speed per point we had at the time, but also 3 points, our initial damage boost up from 301 to 572, which is an insane amount of boosting. This also works perfectly with the enchantment, allowing our basic skills to stack up on each cast to increase our core skill damage by up to 50%. All of these damage increases and debuffs on enemies apply together to make some crazy damage numbers, usually in the several thousands, and I've seen it go as high as 5.9k without any shrine buffs, but I feel like I can push that even further. So lastly, let's talk effective tactics, ones that I've had the most success with, most notably 3 key things to remember when playing. First, your Twisting Blades is your main damage dealer, but eats a lot of energy up. On top of this, any subsequent casts after your setup strikes will still do some decent damage, but not to the same degree. To get around this, we have the life to energy setup as discussed earlier in the video, but also frequent use of our Invigorating Strike to get energy regen, and also set up our damage buffs through our enchantment and our combo strikes. Usually you'll want to fit in around about 3 to 5 of these strikes before going in for the big strike, as this will be where you see the most damage increase. Secondly, you can get insane amounts of crits and damage from using your concealment skill with guaranteed crits when you've stacked up for a big Twisting Blade, as the crit persists after the initial cast to any target hit for its return journey. Use this to be able to take down hordes by stabbing an enemy at one end of the group, and then using your dashes to be able to get to the other side, and watch the blades do the work. Then, lastly, as your character has a lot of strength hidden in its crowd control functions, offering things like daze, stun, chill, freeze, and vulnerable, use these to be able to help your teammates and yourself in sticky situations when you have enemies all around. While you aren't completely squishy, it's still not advised to be able to get surrounded from attacks left, right, and centre. But with all that out of the way, it pretty much wraps it up on our first build guide for the Rogue class. Let me know in the comment section down below, what are your thoughts on the Rogue? Is it a class you like the look of? Are you more interested in melee or range playstyles? And would you want to see other elements we can pull off? Leave that all for us down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of this video, and if you want to be able to see more from us at Babylon, especially over Diablo 4, then make sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss out on a future video. But with all that said and done, it just leaves me to say, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves well, and we'll see you all on the next video.